Okay, now I can start. Okay, well, this is the third in the series on the senses, and this is taste. And as I said, until some years ago, we had four tastes. We had sweet, sour, salty, and bitter. And then around the 1990s, we discovered umami, which is the savory taste. And now that's generally accepted as one of the five tastes. And so sweet we have with the sugars, the fruits, and honey. Sour, vinegar, lemon juice, and acids. Salty, mostly sodium, but other salts like potassium and magnesium. And bitter, we have many, many different bitter tastes. And the purpose of bitter is really to warn us of things that may not be good for us. And then we have umami, which is savory, which we see is mostly glutamate, but in meats and cheese. And there'll be a little bit of chemistry here because you'll find that there's certain characteristic chemicals that characterize each of these tastes. I'm not going to talk about the salty licorice, which people have suggested as a sixth taste. This is the taste that you have in black licorice. We're not advanced. Oh, there we go. So we have two types of taste receptors, two mechanisms. One is mediated by G protein and the other one by an ion channel. And it's just interesting that it happens this way. In most senses, there's one major pathway, but in taste, you'll see there's several. And so when we eat, food is placed in the mouth. We have taste, touch, temperature, and we screen for quality and intensity. And the whole purpose is to stimulate saliva so we can chew the food and really decide whether it's good for us. So if we find something that doesn't taste good, presumably that is harmful and we can reject it. So taste is one of the mechanisms by which we protect ourselves from harmful things. So we have sweet, umami, low sodium levels, and they characteristic the nutrient value of the food that we eat. The bitter, the sour, the high sodium is to warn us of whether food may be spoiled or good for us, or whether there's a high mineral content. If it's a sandy, sharp, painful, these are potentially harmful things that we may not want to eat. And then we like creamy stuff, fats, which our brain considers to be highly nourishing foods and highly desirable foods. So as you all know, the tongue is the major organ for taste. We have papillae and taste buds that are the means by which we taste. And the tongue is our main organ with 2,000 to 4,000 of these papillae and about 100,000 taste buds. And we have four types of papillae on the tongue, the fungiform, of which there are about 95 of them, and most of them are on the anterior, the anterior 2 centimeters of the tongue. So they're in the front of the tongue. The folate are on the sides of the tongue, and they each have about 100 taste buds each. The circumvallate in the back of the tongue with an inverted V, and we'll show you that in a minute. And then the filiform, which are the most common projections on the tongue, but they have no taste buds. And they're there basically to give us a sense of touch and to hold our food in place. So here's the tongue. We were taught early on that different parts of the tongue were more sensitive to different tastes. So the front of the tongue was more sensitive to sweet, the back of the tongue more sensitive to bitter, salty along the side. But we now know that all of the tongue can detect all of the tastes. Some parts of the tongue are a little bit more sensitive than others, but all of the tongue is capable of tasting all of the different tastes. And so if we look at the tongue here, you can see the V and the circumvallate, which are in the back, the filiform along the side of the tongue, the ones in the front of the tongue, and then on the surface of the tongue, we have all these filiform papillae, and we have the other papillae. But keep in mind that even though the tip is more sensitive to sweet and the back is more sensitive to bitter, the entire tongue is sensitive to all of the tastes. So the different papillae do different things. The fungiform, they're up to about 400 of them, but they only have 3 to 5 taste buds each. The folate, they're about 20. They're the ones on the side, but each of them can have several hundred taste buds. And the circumvallate, the ones at the V in the back of the tongue, there are only about 12 of those, but each one can have several thousand taste buds. So it varies. And the fungiform, or the filiform, are the ones that have no taste buds. So if we look at a filiform papillae, it basically is just a projection on the surface of the tongue. It's basically a little bump. It's there to give a sensation of touch and to hold things in place. So here's really the mechanism by which we taste, the taste bud. And what it is, it's a little opening in the surface of the tongue. You have these yellow cells, which are the taste buds themselves, which have little filaments at the top, which are actually in contact with what we're going to taste. We have a cell at the bottom, a basal cell, which produces these things, and we have a supporting cell, and then we have the nerve that goes from the taste bud back to the brain. There are 3 different subsets of taste buds, the type 1, type 2, and type 3, and they each subserve different tastes. And if we look at them a little closer, they look a little bit differently. The one that's on the far left, the blue, is a salty one, and this is, when it tastes something, it produces an ion. The other 2 produce the so-called G protein. Now, this is complicated. I'm not going to go through it, but the important thing to take away is that when you taste something, various chemical mechanisms occur, and the eventual process is that a nerve impulse is generated and it goes to the brain. Unlike most of the other senses, taste has 3 nerves that innervate it. The others have usually 1 nerve. The eye has the optic nerve, the ear has the acoustic nerve. Taste has 3 nerves involved, and I don't know why, but there they are. So if we look at the tongue, we can see the 3 nerves going to the brain. They go first to the midbrain, then they go to the thalamus, and eventually we come to the cortex, the forebrain, and this is where we actually detect the sensation of taste. This is a part of the brain that's also associated with emotions. And maybe that's why we are susceptible to having tastes that we shouldn't have. So if we look at taste biology, the food quality, intensity, they're encoded in these 5 basic tastes. It's combined with smell. And so taste is not just by itself. We also get a sensation of what things taste like by what's coming through the nose, especially in the back part of the nose. And then we're going to talk about these sweet receptors in relation to diabetes, particularly type 2 diabetes. As we get older, we lose taste buds. It's part of natural aging. We have about 10,000 of these taste buds at birth, and we're slowly losing them as we get older. Each of these sensory cells has a very short lifespan. Most of them about a 10-day lifespan, but some last only a day before they're renewed. There's a rapid turnover. And then unfortunately, we have impaired taste. Half of us will have impaired taste. That's the statistics. But a lot of things can mess up what we taste, and particularly certain drugs. And Diamox is a characteristic drug that gives you a metallic taste. It's used for altitude sickness, for glaucoma, but it's notorious for changing how you taste. And then we have things like the common cold, flu, COVID-19, which affect how we taste. A lot of us, if we got COVID-19, found that we weren't tasting as well as we would like to. And then if we have a sinus infection, that can involve our taste. Nutritional deficiencies, if you're deficient in vitamin B12, vitamin A, folate, it can diminish your taste. And then certain drugs are notorious for affecting taste, namely lithium, thyroid, some antidepressants. I've had personal experience with the last one on the list, the alpha-lipoic acid. It's not really a drug, it's really a supplement, but it was touted to help neuropathy, which I have. And so I figured, let's give it a try. Well, it didn't help the neuropathy, but what it did do was eliminate my sense of taste and not my sense of smell. So imagine holding a glass of wine up to your nose, smelling this wonderful bouquet, taking a sip, and it tastes like water. Well, it's great if you're trying to go on a diet and lose weight because all of your food has no taste. Fortunately, it's temporary, and after about a week or so, my taste came back. So drugs can do this. Why am I not advancing? There we go. People who are smokers frequently have diminished taste, and usually when they stop smoking, they complain that they gain weight because now their taste is improved and they're eating more. But if you have inflammation in the mouth, your taste may be impaired. A lot of diseases impair taste, like the neurological diseases, amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, multiple sclerosis, Parkinsonism, Bell's palsy, trauma, cancer, if you've had radiation or chemo, a lot of things impede taste. And then we have some inherited conditions. Fortunately, they're quite rare. Turner syndrome is rare. Familial dysautonomia is even more rare. And then we have some genes that we don't know what they do, but they influence how we taste. So they have this interesting gene which impairs our ability to taste two interesting chemicals which we will never come in contact with. So we have no idea what this gene is doing there or why we even have it, but there it is. About 25% of people have it, and they cannot taste these two chemicals. Now we have to talk about diabetes type 2, because there seems to be a general decrease in the ability to taste sweet things. So we have an increased desire to eat sweet things. This increases our blood sugar, and it's a vicious cycle. So because our sweet taste is impaired, we eat more sweets, and it really messes up our prediabetes. These studies were done in people who were so-called pre-diabetic, meaning their A1C was somewhere in the range of 6. So we have a science of taste. Confucius says everybody eats and drinks, but few appreciate taste. And even though there are 5 different tastes, there are about 100,000 different flavors. And so flavor is a combination of taste, odor, texture, temperature, and also we have to include pain because of a lot of things that we eat that are, you might say, painful. They have capsaicin, and chili peppers are the classic. Now, we eat food, and we have to talk about what happens to the food that we eat. And you need to know about the so-called Maillard reaction. And this is the reaction that causes a brown crust on bread and your nice crust on a grilled steak. And so it enhances the flavor of the food we eat. What it is, it's a polymerization of protein and carbohydrate to produce this. It increases our taste. Some people have suggested that it may also possibly be carcinogenic. So that's up in the air. Now, if we look at some basic foods like bread, basic bread is flour, water, yeast, and salt, and that's French bread. Add olive oil to it, and you've got Italian bread. And if any of you have baked bread, you know that if this is all you use, in 2 days, your bread is stale. So there's a problem with commercial bread. You've got to give it a shelf life. And in order to do that, you have to add all these other chemicals to it. Emulsifiers, so nothing gets out of the way it's supposed to be. Preservatives, so the bugs don't get at it. An antioxidant, so it doesn't turn brown in the package. Conditioners, so it stays the way we expect it to stay, the way it came out of the oven. Most of us like white bread, and a lot of the flour has bromine added to it to bleach it. And so if you look in Publix, you have a choice of brominated or unbrominated flour. But the reason it's there is to make the flour a little bit whiter. And then we have a problem with shelf life. The bread has to have a certain shelf life. And if we don't have these extra things in it, it gets stale quite rapidly. Now, there are natural and artificial flavors in the food, and the food industry has been very good in figuring out which chemical is characteristic of which flavor. And so the artificial flavors, keep in mind, are the same chemical that's in the natural food. And this is the chemical that gives it its characteristic flavor and aroma. So the best example I can give you is vanilla. Vanilla beans are expensive, but the characteristic chemical in vanilla that gives vanilla its flavor and its aroma is vanillin. And you can make that in the laboratory. So if you open up a bottle of vanillin in the laboratory, you will get an overwhelming aroma of vanilla. So what's the difference? Well, the vanilla bean has other things in it besides vanillin. And so it's a more subtle flavor, and it's probably more muted, and it's probably more complex than if you just use the straight chemical. Now, I need to talk about truffle oil because 99.9% of truffle oil never saw a truffle. What it is 2,4-dithiopentane and olive oil. Now, here's the thing. This chemical is the chemical in the truffle, but the truffle contains a lot more than just this chemical. So probably you want to use the truffle. There's considerable question among chefs as to whether they should even be using so-called truffle oil. And then we have what we call artificial foods. Now, these are foods in the sense that they give us calories, but they're processed. They're highly processed. And we need to look at what we mean by that. So if we start out with unprocessed food, that's food as it comes off the vine of the plant. So you have your vegetables, your fruits, you have your protein, your chicken, your steak, your eggs, and you have whole grains. And then you go to the next step, which is partially processed, your olive oil, your butter, sugar, and honey. And then you process a little bit more and you come to bread, canned frozen fruits and vegetables, cheese. I don't know if salami should be there. It probably should be in the next group of more highly processed food. And the hyper-processed food, we're talking about potato chips, soda, cupcakes, candy, hot dogs, things that have been highly processed. And the most highly processed food of all, or the hyper-processed food, is the Pringle. This is an interesting thing. It was put on the market around 1990, and they were promptly sued by Frito-Lay because they called it a potato chip. And Frito-Lay said, you've got to have 50% potato to call something a potato chip, and you don't have it. So it's now just a Pringle, not a potato chip. But if you look at what's in it, dehydrated potatoes, various vegetable oils, wheat flours. So what you've got is a basic substrate of potato. You've got oil. You've got something to give it substance, the flours. You've got maltodextrin to give it sweetness, emulsifiers to keep everything where it should be, salt to give it some flavor. And the only thing natural about this is the color. Now, the anatonorbixin is actually a natural color. It comes from a plant. So you wonder, why are they going to advanced mathematics to develop this hyperbolic paraboloid shape for an artificial potato chip? Now, it's also of interest that Pringles comes in about 180 flavors, of which about 12 are marketed in the US. So here's the ultimate hyper-processed food. If you listen to this list of ingredients, the only thing that we have in our house is one of those. That's the cornstarch. But everything else you will not have in your kitchen. So the result is you have a product which has a shelf life of over a year. And the only thing that is got in it that will be of benefit to you are the calories. Everything else has been taken out. Now, I'm having trouble reading this because I'm far away, but the Pringle people have figured out what we need to push all our buttons in our brain to make it addictive. So they have the proper combination. Well, it doesn't matter. I can't read it from here. It has a proper combination of salt, fat, sweetness, consistency, and the way it sits on the tongue. So this particular shape of the chip really is designed to prevent breakage and to crunch the proper way. so that our brain really loves this stuff, and you keep eating more and more of it. The example I've given is the Pringle that's the hoisin sauce with buck with Peking duck flavor, and I wish they had that here. But the thing about the Pringle is they've designed this to make us eat more and more of it. Okay. Okay. So the taste signals go to the ventral forebrain areas that control our emotions and our memories. So we remember and we crave certain flavors. Those of you who've read Proust's book, where he talks about the madeleines of his childhood, and he remembers them, and he remembers the flavors. And so this is the part of our brain that gives us our food cravings. When Frito-Lay says you can't eat just one, they mean it. They're serious about it. They've worked hard to do it that way. Well, fortunately, the pharmaceutical industry has come to our aid. We have found out that if we inhibit a GLP-1 hormone, that our brain will diminish our appetite and we will eat less. So we can take a drug like Wegovy, which will help us eat less. So we have a dilemma. The food industry is out to get us to eat more and more. And as a result, we become fatter, type 2 diabetics, and we have a problem. And then the drug industry is getting us to eat less. And I have to admit, I don't have an answer to this dilemma. The only thing I can say is what happened to it. Bon appetit. So if you have any questions, be glad to answer them. We have questions, Pam? Okay.
Questions?
Yeah.
Okay.
How do you explain the phenomenon in which some people eat cilantro and it tastes wonderful, and other people like me, it tastes like soap?
That's
And I think that's not the only item that's like that. That's the only one I'm aware of at the moment.
that's easy. It's genetic. Some people have the genes that have this. Some people don't. I have a gene that makes saccharin taste bitter rather than sweet. So there's a lot of genes involved in taste, and we're just beginning to find out which ones they are, and some of them we find and we don't know what they do. So yeah, that explains why we have all this range of tastes among different people.
Thanks very much, Joe. A few years ago, we had a lady in here, and she was talking about and identifying super tasters. Can you explain what that is and why I don't have it and a lot of people do?
Well, some people, I think it's genetic also. There's some people who are super smellers, and they're in the perfume industry. And so we have people that are super tasters who will, you know, they work in the food industry, and they're the ones who are the connoisseurs of coffee and tea, and these are the people who work for the food companies to figure out what should be in which food.
Hi, some people do regular tongue brushings as part of the daily oral hygiene. What do you think of that custom?
Well, the dentist will say that you should do that it's part of keeping the tongue healthy and clean, and that, a mild brushing of your tongue would be beneficial.
Any other questions? Okay.
It's a very basic question. When we take something hot, like really hot, and burn our tongue, does that mean the receptors are destroyed?
Well, you're probably destroying some taste buds, but the taste buds regenerate. Now, the unfortunate thing is we lose taste buds as we get older anyway. So it's a problem. Yeah. But I don't think you're going to burn that much. In other words, you're probably not even going to get to a first-degree burn before you spit it out.
Yeah, right. But then how long does it take to regrow them?
Well, it depends how much damage you've done. Probably not long. If you're eating a hot pizza, you get a pizza burn on your palate, and it takes a while. maybe an hour or two to get back to normal.
And a second question is the connection of smell and taste. Um, some people don't have a sense of smell. I know my sister-in-law can't smell. When she cooks, she says, "Can you smell the garlic? Have I put in enough?" Because she can't smell it. But she can taste all right.
Yes, well,
What is the why do people, is it a nervous thing or the nerves or the receptors or what? What
well,
causes that
you,
lack
you, ha-
of?
you have different nerves for smell. And so you could knock out smell and not taste. And the two enhance each other. In other words, if you have both
Yeah,
smell and taste, then
right.
things taste better. But if one is knocked out, say your taste is knocked out because of COVID, you still have the smell, which is coming from behind the nose. And so that helps. So when I had my little absence of taste because of the stuff I took, I could smell fine, but taste was absolutely knocked out. So they two complement each other.
I took a cold medicine once that had zinc in it.
Had
And
what?
took a cold medicine that had zinc
Right.
in it and totally lost my taste. I don't know if that's common. I did see zinc on one of your lists,
That's-
but my goodness, I was so surprised that they can still sell this stuff and that people take it and can still eat.
Right. Well, a lot of people take zinc as a supplement and it doesn't affect their taste. And the people who have macular degeneration are taking the pills for it. That's basically vitamin C with a little bit of zinc and a little bit of copper. So
So people can take
people,
zinc
most
without
people,
problems.
most people can do it without problem. There's always somebody out there who will be sensitive to something, but most people can take the stuff.
How much is taste conditioned by genes or conditioned by society? I'm thinking of France, for instance, where supposedly people have a lot of taste for food. They live to eat rather than eat to live. But is that and in all classes of society? So is that conditioned by habits or not really by genes? What is it? Oh, when I first arrived in the United States a long time ago, I ate a hamburger in a McDonald's and I thought it was the most awful thing. But then, you know, maybe my taste buds changed, you know, now I don't like it, but it's not as awful. But was that just habit, different habit?
No, I have been to France and the food is wonderful. And I think the French have the right idea about food and about the importance of it and the importance of enjoying a meal. And here we sort of eat to live, fast foods, which are probably not that good for us. We have a different attitude, and I think that's cultural. But I think the French have the right idea.
Do people's individual body chemistry dictate what tastes good to them or not? For instance, I cannot tolerate anything hot at all, and yet my sons love hot things. But I also found out that I have GERD, and so that's one of the things you have to stay away from. The same thing with fizzy things, but I've never liked hot things or fizzy drinks, but I didn't have GERD way back then. So does your body chemistry dictate your taste?
I don't really know the answer to that. It's, people like different things, and I don't think we have a genetic answer for it. I really can't give you a good answer. I'm sorry.
There's a question on Zoom. Autistic children are highly sensitive to sounds, some smells, and will eat only certain things. Are they super tasters, etc.?
Well, they may be. I mean, people taste things differently. And there's some people who will, like people like the Indians who like a lot of hot, spicy food, the stuff that would make us cringe. But, it's what? The wild, It's an acquired taste. Okay.
Joe, what did you say about MD disease and taste or smell?
About what disease? I'm sorry.
Macular degeneration.
Well, as far as I know, macular degeneration has no influence on taste at all. It's an eye disease, and it affects the eye. As far as I'm aware, there is no connection between the two.
I misunderstood you.
Well, the drug, the ARIDS stuff, this was an interesting study. There was a subgroup of people with dry macular degeneration, and they're the ones that had these little yellow dots on the back of the eye. They were the group that's at risk. And they found that if you give them this combination of vitamin C, little copper, little zinc, it slowed the risk of progression. It didn't slow the progression. It was a large multi-university study. It was statistically significant. And the feeling was, well, it's an innocuous thing to take. And if it helps a little bit, why not? There's no reason for people who are not at risk to take this. You may as well just take a multivite. But there's some drugs now for dry macular degeneration that are in the pipeline that are promising. And that'll probably preclude the ARIDS pill, the vitamin C. Yeah.
I do the AREDS, and I'm wondering if the dosage suggested by the box or by the container to take 2 pills twice a day is by the finance officers of AREDS, or do you really need that much? That would be 4 pills a day, and each pill has way over 100% of the recommended daily dose of whatever.
My own bias about the AREDS is eat a salad and eat an orange, because, you know, it's innocuous and the effect is not that great. Fortunately, dry type macular degeneration is fairly slow. And so you're talking about years and decades in progression as opposed to the wet type.
I have a question. Do people's tastes change over time? When my husband was alive, he had a serious heart problem, and we were advised to have very, very low sodium meals. And I created everything from the very, with as low sodium as possible. And at first I hated it. And then as time went on, and that's what he was eating, I thought, oh, this is really quite delicious.
Right. Well, I think we get used to taste intensity.
Getting used to it.
And a lot of people are on a low salt diet. Now, if you remember years ago, there was a product called Accent, monosodium glutamate, which was the first of the umami products. And this enhanced the flavor of things. And we don't know whether it was the glutamate or the sodium, but this gave rise to so-called Chinese restaurant syndrome and a few other things because you got a load of salt along with it.
Yeah.
So there is something there about the salt. And, you know, chefs will put a lot of salt in things because it does enhance the flavor of the food. And so it's one of the things that we sense. We sense salt along with fat and sweet and texture as to how we like the foods we eat. And so you can get used to a low sodium diet. I mean, I find I don't miss the salt.
I see. Okay, because he could no longer go to any restaurant, at the end of his life. So I knew that things had changed, but I just got used to it.
Right. Well, if you have, hypertension, and particularly if you're African American, you're salt sensitive. So people are becoming more and more aware. And also, we eat a lot more prepared food, which is loaded with salt. If you look at the ingredients, and virtually everything they have to list the amount of salt. Salt is in everything.
Some more questions?
I have a very important question, which I'm amazed has not been brought up before this late in the afternoon question. this has to do with, and you,
Yeah.
this has to do with wine tasting. Wine
Oh, wine
tasting.
tasting.
This is something that you probably had some experience with personally. And
Yes.
many people in the audience are dedicated to this habitual routine. So when I read the back label of a wine bottle, there is this person who clearly graduated with at least a master's in English that describes the bouquet, the beginning of the taste of the wine, the middle taste of the wine, a fine finish, and blackberries, raspberries, apples, citrus, and all of these delicious sounding things are mentioned. And when I drink the wine, I can detect virtually none of those things. Now, it could be that I'm too far into the gallon bottle of wine to really notice that, but any rate, more seriously is how good are people at detecting these various presumed tastes? And a second question is related, which is that those people much more affluent than I have to have a Rothschild 92 or something like that for $1,500 a bottle. And then we read articles in very important journals that are available at the rack as you leave the grocery store. And they discuss things such as the best wine experts can't tell Gallo from Rothschild, so-and-so. Comment.
Well, my own feeling about wine is that it's to be enjoyed. Now, when you talk about the sommelier and the descriptions of the wine, my oldest daughter went to Cornell, and when they're seniors, they can take a class in enology. So they learn about wines. So she came home and I decided I would put on my sommelier hat. So I took a glass of wine and I swirled it. Then I said, you can see the aroma of the blackberry and the currants and the strawberries. And I went on and on like this. And I say, everything is in there except the flavor of the grape from which the wine was made. That's the one thing you will never, ever find a sommelier saying. And so I think most of it is probably hype. It helps sell wines. Now, as far as good wine, the people at UC Davis, the people in Cornell have figured out how to make wine. So you rarely get a bottle of bad wine nowadays. Now, it has different flavors and different sweetnesses and different types, but it's rare to get a bad bottle of wine. Now, as far as the people who are spending $1,800 for a bottle of Chateau Petrus, I probably couldn't tell the difference between that and Thunderbird, but be that as it may, I think wine is to be enjoyed. There's a lot of hype associated with this. As far as the expensive bottles, it's really what the market will bear.
I think that people's tastes change over their lifetime. I don't know what the science is behind that, but certainly the foods that I liked when I was 10, most of them I think are awful now. And many of the things I eat now, I'd never even heard of then. But, and babies, when they are first born, like everything sweet, it seems like their sweet tongue develops first. And then only after about a year do they like things that are tangy and salty. So I guess that's somewhat developmental. But I think most people find that their taste changed over their lifetime.
Yeah, I think the purpose of sweet is to tell our brain that what we have is good for us, as opposed to bitter, which might be bad for us, might be a poison. And I know you can't get a baby to eat spinach, prunes, or
Or a
apricots.
grown-up. I went to a Cornell alumni wine tasting in the DC area many, many years ago, and all the wines were in paper sacks, so you couldn't read the labels. And then we put our choices down, and we generally thought the best wine was the more expensive one without knowing what was there. But now, who knows? I mean, you get $2 Chuck, sometimes tastes good, sometimes not.
Yeah, $2 Chuck is now $3 Chuck.
Is there any other questions?